Like I mentioned, there's a cutout specifically for this size of fan. Now, the first thing we need to do, because I did not pre-wire this bulkhead, which is my mistake, we need to make sure that we have some wire in there. However, there's no way that this wire is going to fit through that bulkhead because it is just stuffed with insulation, and this is way too flimsy. And unfortunately, I don't have some sort of thin wire pole that I can use. So I figured out that just simply using a small zip tie, actually this is like one of those 12-inch zip ties, nice and thin, works great. So let's go ahead and feed this through a little crack right in here, and it should end up somewhere right about here, and then I'll be able to tie off a couple of wires for the fans. So now that I have my zip tie fished through the bulkhead, I have one of these 100-foot solid copper 20 gauge reels of wire here, and you can just pick this up at any local Lowe's if I remember correctly. I think that's where I got this one. I've had it for a while now. What I want to do is simply fish 2 individual sets of these wires and go all the way back to where the fireplace is, because the next cabinet that I have going up on top of the fireplace enclosure is actually going to be my little command center, if you will. It'll show me my voltage and be able to turn on and off certain functions of the van, and anyway, so that's the goal. I'll probably need about 9 feet of cable per. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started on that. Alright, I don't know how long that is, but all I did was I went from roughly where the fan switches will be located, and gave myself about an extra 6 inches, because better to have extra cable than not enough cable and find out when it's too late. So I ran a line from roughly where the switches are going to be going to where I need the fans to be. And now I'm going to cut this off. And I gave myself an extra roughly 4 to 6 inches on this side where the fans are too. So I'm now going to cut this one off, and I'm going to simply drag the wire, you know, next to each other, so that way I have exactly the same length on the second pair of wires. I still have some left over for the next project, although I'll probably have to buy more of this, and it's super cheap. I think it was like $5 for the entire roll of 100 feet. So even if I end up throwing away like 10 feet of it or whatever, not the end of the world. Now you might be asking, why 2 runs of wire? Why not just simply the one and share the voltage between both fans? And that's an understandable question. The reason why I want to run 2 lines of cable is because I want to have the functionality of turning on or off each fan individually. I did the calculation, and this wire will handle up to about 5 amps without starting to get warm. So it's not an issue of current. It's just it's just the concept of functionality. So that's why. If I want to have air blowing out, like heat blowing out, then I'll have that ability. Or if I want to simply blow cool air in, but don't necessarily want to blow air back out into the cab because maybe I have something in there and some sort of paperwork or whatever, because I plan on using the cab area as an office as well. And if I have some paperwork out and I don't want it to blow all over the place, maybe I don't want to turn on that fan. So there is reason. I would imagine that most of the time I'll have both fans going at the same time, but I don't want to rule out the possibility that I'll only want to use one fan at a time. So that's really the only reason why I want to run 2 lines of wire. So just in case you're wondering. I'm going to take both of my wires here. For anyone who has never fished wires through a tight space, little tip: if you place one end of the wires and the other end a little bit lower than that one, a little bit lower than the first one, it makes it more aerodynamic, and that allows the wire to fish through tight spaces easier. I used to run bulk network lines in industrial buildings, so I've got a few tricks up my sleeve on running wire. Now it's time to pull the cable through. So let's go ahead and tape this little guy up to this little guy. You don't need much tape, just a little bit. Shouldn't need more than this, just for a simple pull like this one. Now, worst case scenario, if the pull doesn't work, I can simply try it again. But I'm fairly confident that it's going to work just fine. So let's give this a try. Alright, and one important factor. Now I know which cable is which right now, but I'm going to want to mark each one, so that way I don't get them mixed up when it comes time to wire them to their own individual toggle switches. How I'm going to do that is by putting tape on both ends of each cable and marking either number 1 or number 2, or maybe I can do in and out. Find out. I think I'm going to do the in-out method. So I'll just take tape to each one. Just a few inches past the end, so that way it's enough to where I can label it and still be able to do some hard wiring. And just do that on both sides of both wires. So right after doing the cable pulls in the bulkhead, I decided to check on the status of the mechanic and see if he was available yet. And apparently not. I'm not going to get my brakes done today, unfortunately. And but I talked to the supervisor on shift, and he said that tomorrow he's got both mechanics, and one of them is wide open, so he's going to assign that mechanic to this van first thing in the morning until everything is done. So I'm thankful for that. And I'm not resentful whatsoever at AMCO. These complications come up, and I get that. So no big deal. And so I'll just come by early in the morning tomorrow. Well, not early for me because I start work at 6 o'clock in the morning on weekdays. So I'll still be able to pretty much sleep in. And I'll be able to get my brakes done. So looking forward to that. So I'm going to go ahead and head home, and we'll continue the van build as soon as I get there. So hang tight, be right back. Alright, I am back home, and I decided to change out of my work clothes. Now I grabbed those other parts that I didn't have with me earlier, and those are a couple of fan cables. One side will plug into the fan itself, and the other I will just splice off and hardwire into the fuse box. So I got a couple of those, and I have two 120 millimeter fan grills, and they have built-in filters. So the advantage of that is if I want to have air circulating and I have my windows down, their bugs can't just get into the living area. And even if they tried, they'd probably get sliced and diced by the fan blades anyway. So these, I've already tested the fit more or less, and they should work out really nice, especially once I put the 1/8 inch foam backer over the bulkhead, but that's not until further down the road. Anyway, let's go ahead and get these fans installed. Alright, our next step is to run the wire all along underneath this piece right here, and that actually extends all the way to the very back of the van, and it loops around to the other side. It's where the high top conjoins with the chassis of the van. And as you can see, I did end up labeling both cables, my in, which is going to be the bottom fan, and my out, which is going to be the top fan. So I'll be running along here. So let's get to work. Now the partition wall here does block this from being lifted all the way, so I'll just have to lift it open slightly, just enough to be able to tuck the cable in. Alright, that's that. It's roughly where I want it to be. And the cabinet will hide it just fine. So what I'll do from here is just leave this where it is. I have the toggle switches down here as well, so that's just, don't worry, that won't move. It'll just stay where it is without a problem. Okay. So a little bit of information in case you did not know this, and there's a good chance that you did, but just in case, these 3-prong fan adapters have 3 different colored wires. The black is for negative, the red is for positive voltage, and the yellow is for fan control. And that yellow wire is basically for the motherboard to be able to control the speed in which the fan rotates, but we are not going to be plugging either one of these into a motherboard. We are going to plug them directly into house power. So we actually do not need to have the yellow wire at all. In fact, we won't even need this part. We'll just need to have this part. So I'll be cutting off this and then hardwiring to this. Alright, now that we have both fan connections wired up, the next step is to test both fans to make sure that they both work. And the best way to do that, especially before putting toggle switches on, and I'm not going to have any sort of permanent mount installation of the toggle switches, but we'll get into that after we test both fans. I know one of them actually does work, but we'll test both of them anyway. And the best way to do that is to actually hook them up right directly to the fuse box, which I normally just have tucked underneath the bed, but for right now I've pulled it out. So sure is. And I can just feel that. That's awesome. Fits perfectly. Let's try the other one. All right, verdict says. And it works. I did label